Talking about our different colors here. Come a little closer. From things like stones and minerals. So we have simple things like a red ochre or a yellow ochre. We have more expensive things that were being used in that time, like maybe lapis lazuli for blue. That's the malachite for green. We also made a blue from what's called azurite or azurite. That's one of Rembrandt's blues. And the other one, that's a copper carbonate. And the other one that people know of is cobalt. But cobalt in that time, what they do is they make glass from it. Cobalt straight out of the ground is black. So they fire the sand, a blue piece of glass, and break that, grind that up, and then you get what they call smalt. And then you have these three, which are the poisonous ones in time. Don't worry, they're not the ones, actual ones. But what that was in Rembrandt's time that was poisonous was a lead white. You don't want to eat that. The way they made a lead white is they put that into jars like this. You put vinegar in that jar. You cover that with a cloth. You cover that with horse manure. You let that sit around for about 3 months. The heat, the ammonia, the vinegar, that oxidizes that thoroughly and turns that into a hard white object that you can then grind into this powder. So that was our Dutch lead white. If I then heat up some tin or pewter, this metal, melt that down, I add some of the powdered lead white to it, they'll chemically react and turn into this super bright yellow. That's a lead tin yellow. And the third one, not so healthy, was red. That's called vermilion. And that was mercury and sulfur that was cooked together. So we don't recommend licking your brushes when using those. Those are substitutes, so no one's going to hurt themselves. If you want a safer red, a more organic red, this is cochineal lice. So those are little bugs from Mexico. They grow on our cactus, like you see here. So you grind them up. You grind the bugs up and you get this, you get this really dark purple. And that's not going to make a good pigment, so you make a dye out of that, like dyeing clothing, because it's going to fade in strong light. You dye a pigment with no color of its own, and then you end up with this really bright red, what they call carmine red. And that's just going to be more light fast than if I use the straight cochineal. But that's also what they use in food, to color food, also to color clothing. I could also make a nice red the same way with what's called crop black, or it becomes crop black. This is the root of a plant, the maycrop plant. So I make a dye out of that, again dyeing a pigment with no color of its own, and then I end up with the crop black. And it doesn't look so strong at this point, but when you mix any of these with the oil, then they really kind of come to life. So the lapis lazuli, that's kind of a lighter color, doesn't look so interesting. When mixed with the oil is really nice and deep blue. The darker azurite, when mixed with the oil, is actually a little lighter. And then that's my cochineal here. That's my maycrop, so they're stronger when they're made up into paint. And any of these I can get a different finish with it. So I can make any of them kind of matte or glossy just by how much oil I'm adding into the paint. So before we go too far with that, all of these different colors, they're mixed to get to that point with oil. And that oil, in Rembrandt's time, that was linseed oil. So that's a healthy oil made from seeds. So you can eat them. But what happens with linseed oil is it will dry. And over time, air goes into it, and then it turns itself into plastic. So before that happens, what I've made here...
You said plastic.
Plastic, yeah. So here, it acts like oil. I have a feel here. It feels like plastic.
Yeah.
And it has that stone or mineral as the pigment. That's what makes it so durable, why the color's not going to fade. And it's why Rembrandt sticks to just these 16 pigments throughout his life. He not only knows them, but he knows that other people have been using them with success. So why, change those things, stick with that. and then this oil and pigment here that's mixed on a stone like this. And we have that because Rembrandt had such a stone. You can see that here in this self-portrait. Grinding stone, it's kind of hard to see. It's called porphyr, so it's a volcanic stone. It's actually from the Netherlands, but it was pushed here during the Ice Age.
Long time.
Yeah. And we have a hard surface because of this hard materials that we're using. And what I'm going to make this time is my burnt sienna. And what's interesting with that is sienna, if you go there, it actually looks like this in nature. But if I heat this stone up in a stove or an oven, it's actually going to turn into this red color. The last one I made for lunch, we'll make a little bit more. That way I don't have to clean up as much. Go from the lightest color to the darkest. That way you don't have to clean up as much along the way. And then every pigment's a little different. And what I know about this one, my burnt sienna, it takes a lot of oil. If it was the red ochre, this one looks almost the same. Well, that takes half as much oil. So they're all a little different. Some take more, some take less, and then they also dry differently. And what's strange is the burnt sienna, it'll actually dry, it's going to dry a lot faster than the red ochre that has less oil. So if you think it's confusing for you right now, imagine if you were a 12 or 13-year-old sitting here doing this for Rembrandt, because that's what was happening here. His students were making his paints. They were learning about these different colors, how they worked with each other. And what you're also learning is you can't just stir it up with a knife like this to turn it into paint. If I use this as paint, the oil is going to start to leak out of the pigment, so they'll separate. So again, why the large stone and the small stone here, this is a Belgian hard stone. It is ironically softer than the porphyr, so it wears out instead of the more expensive stone. It's wearing out because it's rubbing over the surface. This process, that's what makes the emulsion. That's what makes that oil and pigment really one thing instead of those two separate things. And it's terribly difficult, but I make just a little bit because I have to do this till 5. So pace yourself. And we did pretty much the same thing in Rembrandt's time. I'm not trying to make up all the paint for the night watch in that first morning. As long as I have my same little jars of pigment, I can always make up this same color. You can see I can make little peaks with it. So it's going to stay right where you put it. I just have to do this some 6 to 10 times until I've made all the colors for one day. Does anybody want to see what that feels like? Because you're going to go right home and make some paint. You're leaning right over. Here, just give that a little try.
Wow.
Is it easy?
Not really.
Not really, yeah.
Probably you can do that.
The whole day, yeah, that's the point, yeah. So again, that's why the students get involved. People go in.
Wow.
And this is just one aspect of the process. So you're making the paint. Before that, you might even be grinding it up with the mortar and the pestle. All these little things have to happen in the studio.